Vice President Kamala Harris trails Donald Trump by 2 percentage points based on 67 polls tracked in DDHQ and The Hill's latest poll average. This margin of lead for Trump is almost identical to Real Clear Polling's latest average as well, showing Trump up 1.7%. Harris is effectively guaranteed to officially succeed Joe Biden as the Democratic Party's nominee at the party's convention in Chicago next month, after the incumbent president announced his withdrawal from the race yesterday. This is truly an unprecedented moment in American history. We have never seen an incumbent president secure enough delegates to become his party's nominee and then drop out this close to Election Day. Yet with that said, as we are indeed less than 4 months out from the first votes being counted, there is just no time to lose in terms of assessing how Vice President Kamala Harris will fare against former President Donald Trump on the 2024 Electoral College map. In today's video, I'm going to take you through each of the competitive battleground states, filling them out with prediction ratings based on the limited polling data that we have so far, along with other relevant factors like past results, trends, and demographic data. Here I have already filled in the deep blue and red states that will vote Democrat or Republican no matter who the nominees are. Biden and Trump carried them all by at least 8 percentage points in the 2020 election, and pretty much every public election forecast currently has them down either with a safe rating or gives one candidate a better than 90% chance of winning. Now, the rest of these states, left in gray, are all more competitive and could all theoretically flip under the right conditions for one party. They combine for 199 electoral votes and are the 14 states that I fully expect to end up being the closest in terms of margin, separating the two candidates once all the votes are counted. That being said, of course, most of them still do have a strong degree of lean toward one side. Before I do get into those unique dynamics in each of these specific competitive states, let's take a step back for a second to think about what this Harris switch means for Democrats in the grand scheme. I think most people in the party would agree that it simply could not have gotten any worse than with Biden, which is why he ultimately ceded to the mounting pressure and dropped out of the race. His approval ratings are the lowest of any presidential candidate in almost 80 years, and he has consistently pulled behind Trump, not just nationally, but also in each of the key battleground states. And with Harris now leading the ticket, there is likely to be a surge in Democratic enthusiasm, especially among younger and minority voters, two of the party's most essential coalitions, as polls have repeatedly shown that those voters were just not even remotely energized to vote for the 82-year-old white Joe Biden. They simply wanted an alternative to Trump that they could feel good about. And that point has been proven by the fact that Democrats are on pace for the largest 24-hour fundraising period in American history, with more than $60 million in small donor donations and counting since Biden's withdrawal. Alrighty, now let's get into the key battlegrounds now, starting all the way over in Nevada before working our way back east. There are numerous positive indicators for Republicans here after Democrats have dominated statewide elections for almost 2 whole decades. Nevada has shifted 5 points in favor of the Republican Party relative to the nation since 2012 and ranks 44th out of the 50 U.S. states in terms of the proportion of residents with a college degree. That's the lowest of any state that Biden won in 2020, an important demographic note considering the partisan educational divide is growing deeper and deeper in this country. In the 2022 midterm cycle, Republican Joe Lombardo flipped the governor's office, while Republicans also came within a point of defeating a relatively popular Democratic incumbent senator as well. And perhaps most notably, they received more votes for U.S. House than Democrats for the first time in decades. As for current polling, perhaps no other state has trended more positively for Trump than Nevada. He led Biden by around 5 points in the final DDHQ average before Biden dropped out, and according to 4 polls assessing the Harris versus Trump matchup up to this point, Trump leads by 8.6% on average. That would be an 11-point swing from Biden's 2.5-point victory in Nevada in 2020. Now, of course, all of these poll averages that you're going to see here in this video between Trump and Harris are based entirely on polls that came out before the news that Biden dropped. And of course, before Harris is officially the nominee. So you should expect to see her close these gaps a bit over the coming weeks. Based on all of these factors, though, I do have Nevada tilting towards Trump at the moment. As while the polls do suggest a comfortable Trump victory, Nevada is still fundamentally more of a purple to tilt blue state. Next is Arizona, where Biden won by only 0.3% in 2020. It was his second narrowest victory after Georgia at 0.2%. We'll get to that in a few. Arizona had long been a reliably Republican state, as beginning with Dwight D. Eisenhower in 1952 and ending with Trump in 2016, Republican presidential candidates carried Arizona in 16 of 17 presidential elections. Now, their dominance did begin to show cracks at the start of the 21st century, and now Democrats have won the last 4 federal elections for president and U.S. Senate, and the most recent race for governor as well. This trend towards the political center in Arizona has largely been driven by the explosive population and growth in the diversification of Phoenix, the fastest growing metro area in the entire country. Much like Clark County encompassing the Las Vegas metro area in Nevada, Maricopa County, encompassing Phoenix and Arizona, is the single biggest factor in determining statewide elections here, as it does contain about 2/3 of Arizona's population. Biden became the first Democrat to receive the most votes here in Maricopa since 1952, as the split in Maricopa in 2020, 50.3% to 48.1%, was just enough to overcome the slight Republican edge across the rest of the state to help Biden win with 49.4% to 49.1%, a raw vote margin of just 11,000 votes. Looking ahead to 2024 now, though, the polling trend between Biden and Trump in Arizona has mirrored Nevada very closely. Trump led by 4.7% in the final DDHQ average. The former Republican president has also led in this average since around October. And again, like in Nevada, the Harris versus Trump average does show Trump with a healthy advantage among just a few polls so far. Again, based on all of these factors, Arizona will join Nevada as a tilt Trump state on the map. New Mexico is the first state to go in the Harris column as likely Democrats. It did back Biden by 11 points in 2020, which actually marked the first time since 1968 that New Mexico voted to the right of Colorado, which is now considered solidly Democrat. Both states narrowly voted for George Bush in 2004, but have since backed Democratic candidates by margins of around 5 to 12 points in every election since, and I do expect that to continue here in 2024. The fact that New Mexico is now generally considered to be less Democratic, though, than Colorado can largely be attributed to its demographic profile. It is the 12th least educated state in the country in terms of proportion of residents with a college degree at 30%, which among Biden-won states in 2020 is second lowest behind Nevada. It's also the 15th most rural, which ranks only behind Vermont and Maine among the least urban Democratic states. It's also the only majority Hispanic state in the U.S., and so if Republican gains among Hispanic voters continue, as we'll continue to discuss next in Texas, that could potentially make up some of their deficits, at least enough for me to project that it will remain in likely D territory around a D+7 to D+9 margin. Now back to Trump we go. Texas goes in the likely Republican category. The Lone Star State has not voted for a Democratic presidential candidate in almost 50 years, but has become much more competitive over the last decade. Democrats entered 2020 with high hopes of flipping Texas blue and thereby turning the Electoral College math entirely in their favor, but Trump's 6-point win in 2020 dampened those hopes significantly. His margin of lead did drop from 9 points against Hillary Clinton in 2016. It was the lowest of the 21st century, and Biden's 46.5% vote share was the largest for a Democrat in Texas since 1976. Ultimately, though, it was a disappointing performance for Democrats, as Biden had polled within 1.5 points of Trump in the final polling averages, and several forecasters had Texas rated as a toss-up going into Election Day. Trump and the Republican Party made rapid gains among Hispanics in 2020, and that has continued since, specifically in the Rio Grande Valley here in South Texas, even as you see the large urban and suburban areas moving in large numbers towards Biden here. A lot of Hispanic voters quite simply abandoned the Democratic coalition. Democrats have been benefiting from the state's rising population of college grads, younger voters, and minorities, but Texas is 40% Hispanic, rendering their losses among this demographic especially catastrophic. Trump should carry Texas by a margin of around 6 to 10 points this November. Now, before we head over to the Southeast region, please take a moment to consider subscribing to my channel down below. According to my channel analytics page, nearly 90% of my viewers are not subscribed. It's completely free, and it does ensure that you don't miss any of my future videos. Thank you. Alrighty, Georgia, 16 electoral votes, the closest state in 2020, as Biden won it by just 0.2% over Trump, thanks to strong minority turnout, especially among black voters in the Atlanta metro area. Now here in 2024, we have seen early polls showing Trump making gains over Biden among black voters, and there's also a rapidly growing Hispanic population in Georgia that again has trended to the right over the last few cycles. Now with Harris at the top of the ticket, it's reasonable to believe that the gains that Trump has made among black voters will probably be a little bit more subdued, though it is difficult to come to a conclusion, of course, so early in this revamped campaign. Georgia is also just a traditionally conservative and more religious state than other battlegrounds, meaning the issue of abortion is not necessarily expected to rally Democratic voters quite as much as we've seen it do in the less religious Rust Belt region. Again, though, per the latest polls, Trump led by almost 4 points in DDHQ's final average, another lead he held since October, and the Harris versus Trump average, again, shows Trump leading by a healthy advantage here based on 6 polls. I had Georgia leaning toward Trump against Biden, but I do think it's closer to tilt against Harris, given the general trend of the state's demographics do tend to favor her more than Biden. And then just down in Florida, all of the momentum is with the GOP here in the Sunshine State. Trump carried this once renowned swing state by 3.4% in 2020, the largest margin of victory for any presidential candidate in Florida since 2004. It was one of just 5 states where Trump actually performed better than he did in 2016. And then even more recently, in the 2022 midterm elections, Republican incumbents Governor Ron DeSantis and Senator Marco Rubio both won re-election by landslide margins, at least by Florida standards, 19 and 16%. So while Florida had previously commanded more Democratic attention than any other states on the electoral map over the last 2+ decades or so, that simply has not and will not be the case here in 2024. Trump led Biden by 5.2% in DDHQ's polling average based on 20 polls, and my conservative estimate would pin Trump's 2024 margin against Harris at around 5 to 7 points, though I do think the range of outcomes is pretty wide, and I wouldn't at all be surprised if he ends up winning by closer to double digits when all is said and done. I've got Florida joining Texas as likely Republican. Let's head up to North Carolina now. For how competitive it always seems to be here in 21st century politics, Barack Obama remains the only Democrat to win the Tar Heel state since 1976, and even he failed to hold it during his re-election bid in 2012. The GOP has now won the last 8 federal elections for president and U.S. Senate in North Carolina, each by less than 6 percentage points, defining the state as a purple-ish, yet still reliably leaning Republican state. Most recently, Trump carried North Carolina by just a point in 2020, after carrying it in 2016 by almost 4 points. Now, here in 2024, Trump has led Biden by an average of 5.5% based on 43 polls added to DDHQ and the Hill's polling average. He has led in every single poll taken here in North Carolina, dating all the way back to last March, which is a notable change from the last 2 cycles, where Biden and Clinton led in most surveys headed into Election Day before their losses. Similar to Georgia, I do think that Harris's strengths as a candidate do play better here, as North Carolina is quite diverse, with a strong African-American presence and a growing young college grad population as well. But ultimately, the fundamentals are still just a little too strong for Trump to say that it's anything but leaning towards him at this stage. Virginia is an interesting state. Most likely, the Harris campaign will not have to spend all that many resources to hold the Commonwealth in the Democratic corner this November. It's just a fundamentally blue state now. But there has been a lot of discourse surrounding Virginia lately, as 5 of the last 8 surveys showed Trump leading Biden or tied with him. The overall average at the time of Biden's withdrawal was only Biden plus 1.3, a 9-point swing from his 10-point win in 2020. Looking over here at the map, the growth and diversification of left-trending Northern Virginia, Nova, has made Republicans pretty uncompetitive here in statewide elections outside of Glenn Youngkin's off-year governor upsets. It's another state where I could imagine Harris outperforming Biden from a demographic standpoint as well. The current DDHQ average of 5 polls does support that theory as she leads by 2.6% here over Trump. I've got Virginia down as a lean Democrat state, down from likely Democrat at the start of the cycle, but still pretty comfortably in their column. Up in New England, both New Hampshire and Maine statewide contests are also lean blue. Joe Biden won Maine by 9 points in 2020, and New Hampshire by 7 after they were both decided by less than 3 points in 2016. Trump did come within a half of a point of upsetting Hillary Clinton in New Hampshire in 2016, yet ultimately, while they have consistently been the most competitive states in the Northeast, outside of Pennsylvania, of course, neither state has actually gone red since at least the 2000 election. It would take a seriously strong environment for Trump to flip either state, the kind of environment that we may have gotten had Biden stayed in the race and continued to fade down the stretch. So I guess this is a good example of where I think that Harris may stop the bleeding, so to speak, at the very least for Democrats. As for Maine's 2nd congressional district, though, it receives a likely Trump rating. While Maine's statewide contest is influenced most heavily by its more urban and southern Democratic-friendly 1st district, which backed Biden by 23 points in 2020, this 2nd district is the most rural congressional district in the entire country and much more friendly to Republican candidates. It backed Trump by 10 points in 2016 and then 7 points in 2020, and the 2 polls surveyed here so far this cycle have the former president up by 14 and 20 points, respectively. If I had to project the 2024 margin, I would say a Trump win of around 9 to 12 points is probably the most likely outcome. Now all that's left is Nebraska's 2nd congressional district, along with the Upper Rust Belt quartet that have voted in tandem with each other in almost every modern presidential election. All 4 of these Rust Belt states, Minnesota, Wisconsin, Michigan, and Pennsylvania, voted for the Democratic presidential candidate from 1992 to 2012, before Trump narrowly flipped Wisconsin, Michigan, and Pennsylvania, each by less than a point against Hillary Clinton in 2016. She did still manage to hold Minnesota by just about 1.5 points in that election, but then in 2020, Joe Biden did return this core Rust Belt trio back into the Democratic corner as suburban women especially turned against Trump. Biden won Pennsylvania by 1.2%, Michigan by 2.8%, and Wisconsin by 0.6%, and Minnesota by a full 7 points. So, obviously, that's not a whole lot of breathing room for Harris to take on here, and it's worth noting that one of the primary knocks against her as a general election candidate, especially compared to Biden, is her perceived weakness here in these 3 key states, where white working-class voters will play a central role in whether she can hold off Trump here. Remember that these 3 states decided the last 2 presidential elections. Had Hillary Clinton held them as blue states in 2016, Trump would never have been elected president. And had Trump won them for a second time in 2020, he would be serving a second term in the Oval Office at this very moment. Now, demographically speaking, they each rank very closely in terms of racial diversity and educational attainments. Wisconsin is the 12th whitest state and ranks 29th in the proportion of residents with a college degree. Michigan ranks 20th and 33rd in those categories, while Pennsylvania ranks 19th and 24th. Now, in 2024, it's truly anyone's guess as to how they will vote next. On the one hand, widespread backlash against the Supreme Court's decision to strike down Roe v. Wade rallied Democrats up and down the ballot in key races here in 2022 and 2023. They swept the races for governor in all 3 states, significantly outperforming polling expectations in each case, and in both Wisconsin and Pennsylvania's Senate contests as well, we saw John Fetterman and Mandela Barnes beat their final polling averages by 5 and 3 points respectively, though Barnes still came up short against Republican incumbent Ron Johnson. Perhaps even more notable than any of those results, though, a highly politicized Wisconsin Supreme Court election that almost entirely revolved around abortion rights in 2023 went the liberal justice's way by 11 points. Part of the reason for these overperformances is the fact that Rust Belt states are generally less religious, and therefore less socially conservative than the Sun Belt states in comparison. A Pew Research Center survey found in Michigan, Pennsylvania, and Wisconsin, adults favoring the legality of abortion in all or most cases exceed those opposing it by margins of 12, 7, and 8 percentage points, respectively, whereas this support is narrower in Arizona and North Carolina at 3 and 4 points, and then it reverses in Georgia, where opponents outnumber supporters by a point. All of that being said, despite some economic indicators rebounding over the last couple months, a majority of voters in Wisconsin, Michigan, and Pennsylvania still do hold very negative views on the state of the economy, according to polling data. And history tells us that the president's re-election odds are heavily tied to how voters feel about their personal financial situations at the time of the election. And while Kamala may not be the president, she'll effectively be running as the incumbent of the Biden-Harris administration. And so while she owns the accomplishments, she also needs to answer for the failures. It's absolutely worth noting as well, though, that while Biden is no longer the nominee, he was consistently polling better in these 3 states than anywhere in the Sun Belt region. And this, at least for now, has seemingly carried over to Harris's viability here against Trump as well. In Michigan, she trails Trump by less than half a point, 0.4%, based on 3 polls. The latest survey by Civics from last week shows Trump and Harris tied at 46% support each. Then in Wisconsin, Trump leads by 1.2% based on a 5-poll average, 48.2% to 47%. Again, the latest survey conducted by Civics has the 2 candidates tied at 48% each. And then in Pennsylvania, Trump's lead is greater at 3.8% based on 6 polls, and that same Civic survey that we saw in the other 2 states has Trump up by 2. Now, this does actually track with Biden versus Trump polling as well, as Trump had led Biden by a greater margin in Pennsylvania over the last few months than in either Wisconsin or Michigan. And that's especially significant because Pennsylvania is most often named the most essential battleground this cycle, as not only has it been notoriously competitive over the last few cycles, but with 19 electoral votes and Florida no longer considered a true swing state, Pennsylvania is now the largest prize on the Electoral College map. If Trump flips Pennsylvania, it becomes a whole lot harder to see a path to 270 for Harris and the Democrats. In fact, with a win in Pennsylvania and a win in Georgia, Trump could still lose Arizona and Nevada, as well as Minnesota, Wisconsin, and Michigan, and still win a second non-consecutive term in the White House. I currently have Pennsylvania down as tilting towards the GOP, and Wisconsin as well, while Michigan is a toss-up, and then Minnesota leans Democrat here for Harris. Now finally, in Nebraska's 2nd District, Democrats will have another great opportunity to extract an electoral vote from Trump in a deep red state, as the state legislature failed to get rid of its split electoral system. This Omaha-based 2nd District is rapidly left-trending, going from Romney +8 in 2012 to Trump +2 in 2016, and then Biden +7 in 2020. The district's lines were redrawn after the 2020 census to be slightly more favorable to Republicans, but Biden still would have won the current configuration by 6.3% in 2020. It leans towards Harris here. So, with every state now rated, Trump would secure the presidency with 297 electoral votes over Kamala Harris's 226. 15 electoral votes out of Michigan are a toss-up at this point. It does feel weird saying this in July, but this is obviously a very early prediction. This race has been completely turned on its head, and we're simply going to have to wait a few weeks to see more conclusive polling data before we can make any strong assumptions on whether Biden dropping out was the right choice for Democrats in their quest to fend off another Trump term. Anyways, that does it for this 2024 presidential election map prediction and analysis. Let me know whether you agree or disagree with these ratings in the comments below. Again, make sure to subscribe to my channel so you don't miss any future videos. Shout out to my channel members on screen here. Thank you so much for your support. If you'd like to become a member, go ahead and click the join button below this video to receive exclusive perks. Please leave a like on the video down below if you did indeed enjoy it. You can support my channel by donating via the link to my PayPal in the comments below. Check out more content from my channel here, and as always, thank you so much for watching. I'll see you next time. EP out.